We scorn with every feeling of manhood that is in us the lying hypocrite who knows what he preaches is false, and not only false, but destructive of the very best interests of society, as it is the deadliest blight upon virtue and morality. We know well enough that the Mormons' leaders expect to thrive upon what they call persecution, and that they would delight in getting into controversies with respectable newspapers. But we will, nevertheless, so far humor them on this occasion as to tell them in plain terms what they are, at any rate how they are esteemed by decent people. They are considered hypocrites and impostors, a foul blot upon humanity which ought at once to be wiped out, and that they are tolerated at all is owing not to any regard for them, but for the principles of religious tolerance, under which, with all their loathsome vileness, they have enough sense to know they can be protected. The sledgehammer which is to knock out their brains is not legislation, but public opinion, and we are satisfied to let it do its work.
California American on Mormonism, Western Standard, 20 December 1856. The editor of the American, in another article on the subject of hanging up Mormons like pirates in last week's paper, states that the item in question was the result of a momentary burst of indignation, and that he would not wish to be understood as being literally in favor of publicly executing Mormon preachers. He then delivers his opinion on the benefits of free toleration of religious opinions, etc., and what he would do for the Mormons had he the power to control our national legislation, that he would restrain the hand of destruction aimed at the Latter-day Saints, not for their sake, but for the sake of the country. So far, he attempts to qualify the language of the paragraph in question. But he has no sooner finished his qualifying remarks than he says that could it be done with safety to the principle of free toleration, the propagators of a system like that of Mormonism ought to be hung up. Every one of them is the common enemies of mankind. And again he says that they are a foul blot upon humanity which ought at once to be wiped out. Was it another burst of indignation that called forth these last sentiments? We suppose that we must set it down as such and consider the language somewhat exaggerated, as there is so little difference between these sentiments and the sentiments of the paragraph which he has attempted to qualify, and which he says was the result of a momentary burst of indignation and contained language somewhat exaggerated that we can scarcely detect any difference. We are pleased that the editor has informed us that he is subject to such fits when he reads anything about the progress of Mormonism, as we shall be able hereafter to overlook any exaggerated language that he may indulge in when treating upon this subject. Still under the influence of this burst of indignation, however, he goes on indulging in some very vulgar and ungentlemanly language toward ourselves, giving us his opinion of Mormons in general, and ourselves in particular, informing us what he would do with us were he hangman, that if that were his business, he would consider us fit subject for his attention. All of which, after the explanation he has given, we conclude to be the unmeaning, exaggerated ravings of a man who has a strange habit, whenever the progress of Mormonism is alluded to, of writing about hanging men up like pirates, when in reality, he does not wish to be so understood. Not being subject to momentary bursts of indignation, nor being in the habit of dealing in exaggeration, we confess that we cannot compete with the editor of the American in the use of low, abusive, and ungentlemanly epithets. In this, he excels us. His past education and experience have given him such ready command of ribaldry that we must forever despair of being able to emulate him. Our sense of self-respect and neighborly courtesy, if nothing else, would forbid the attempt. But as the editor of the American is probably not aware of the fact that slang and abuse do not pass among sensible and well-bred people for argument and ability, we take the pains to enlighten him, and to inform him also that the use of such terms as lying hypocrite, miserable fanatic, impostor, filthy monstrosity, foul superstition, etc., only betrays a mean and ignoble spirit that by its proficiency in vulgarity would endeavor to hide its lack of sense. He is of the opinion that the Latter-day Saints expect to thrive on persecution, and that they would delight in getting into controversies with respectable newspapers, insinuating, of course, that he is respectable, and that we ought to submit quietly and resignedly to any insults or abuse to which he may give vent whenever he is seized with one of his bursts of indignation. That is the idea conveyed throughout this whole article. He has said that Mormons ought to be hung up like pirates. We've had the temerity to condemn the sentiment, though uttered by the editor of the California Mormon, and because we have done this, we must be besplattered by the filthy emanations of the brain and pen of a man who calls himself respectable. Now, we wish the editor of the American to distinctly understand that whenever he shall so forget himself as to give utterance to a sentiment similar to that with which we found fault, and which he attempted to qualify, we shall unhesitatingly condemn and expose it. We do not seek either persecution or controversy. But if they are to be the consequence of our condemning odious, tyrannical, and unrighteous sentiments, let them come, and we will do our best to prepare for them. We have been educated to believe that we have an equal right with every other citizen of this republic to express our dissent to everything arbitrary and intolerant, and the fact that we are a Latter-day Saint will never hinder us from exercising it. The religious tolerance of which he speaks and under which he says we have sought protection is not a privilege granted unto us, neither is it anything for which we should be thankful to him or any other man. It's our inalienable right, our birthright, bestowed upon us by the deity himself, and though we may be deprived of it by despots, it is still a right for which we shall ever contend.
Mormons again. Daily California American, 22 December 1856. The editor of the Standard accuses us of using low, abusive, and ungentlemanly epithets, and says something about our past education and experience fitting us for ribaldry. Those who know us, and not strangers, are the best judges of our past education and experience, and they will at least bear us out when we say that our past education and experience never led us into any such vile and shameless conduct as is the everyday practice of Mormonism, whatever have been our past education and experience. And of that, as we have just intimated, we will leave to those who know to speak for us. In regard to our using abusive and ungentlemanly epithets, we can only say that we generally call things by their right names. And now I've lost my place. We consider the Mormon leaders lying hypocrites and can find no fitter words to convey our meaning. We look upon the actual believers in Mormonism as the dupes of impostors and regard their faith as a foul and monstrous superstition and must so express ourselves. If there is a more elegant and gentlemanly way of signifying the same thing, we have no objection to adopting it. But a skunk is a skunk, and it could not change the nature of the animal were we to call it an odoriferous, digitigrade, carnivorous mammal.
The California American again, Western Standard, 3 January 1857. Our article headed The California American on Mormonism, published in the Western Standard of the 20th Ultimo, has called forth a rejoinder from the editor of that paper, which we feel disposed to notice, though at the risk of being again charged by him with a desire to covet his attention. We have an aversion to newspaper warfare. Do you believe that for 1 second? But when assailed in the manner we have been by the American, we should be, in our opinion, recreant to the cause with which we are identified and to every duty incumbent upon us were we to allow it to pass unnoticed. Gentlemanly courtesy will never prompt a man to call another a liar and publish it abroad unsupported by anything but assertion. Much less will it influence him to denounce a whole community as lying hypocrites, impostors, and dupes without advancing the slightest shadow of proof other than his bare opinion to support the charge. What would the editor of the American think were we to call him a dribbler, a political trickster, a man who would advocate any measure and support any candidate if he should only be paid enough? Were we to make such statements and publish them upon no other evidence than our mere say-so, the mildest terms men could use to us would be that we were low, abusive, and ungentlemanly. And the plea that we generally call things by their right names would avail us but little. Yet this would be equally as consistent and honorable a course as the one he has taken towards us in his articles. We have for nearly a year past been disseminating and advocating Mormonism through the columns of this paper. This is the only object we had in view in publishing it. It may be presumed, therefore, that a tolerably correct idea of our doctrines can be gathered from its contents. Now, we defy the editor of the American to bring forward